These days, it seems that more people are using trekking poles for backpacking than not. But when I'm out on the trail, very few folks I see are getting the full benefits of this extremely important and valuable tool. Hey guys, I'm Dan from ShastaBubba Adventures, and I've got a lot to say about trekking poles. I'm going to tell you about modifications you can make to increase their functionality, and I'll show you techniques to turbocharge your trekking poles so you can really crush the big miles and save your body at the same time. Some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about are a little controversial, but I promise to clearly explain my reasoning, and please feel free to ask questions or tell us how you see things differently in the comments section below. That's always welcome. Since there is so much information to go over here, I'll put a table of contents in the description below so you can jump around, skip the parts that you're not interested in, or come back to view the more technical bits again if you'd really like. Now, the number one reason to use trekking poles is to save wear and tear on your joints, especially the knees. Now, you might be young and say, my knees are fine, I don't need poles. To which I respond, well, your teeth are probably fine, but you brush them too, right? When I was in my 20s, I used to just love running down mountains, especially scree slopes and boulder fields. I would get in this kind of zone where I wasn't actively deciding where to place each foot, just trusting in the reactions to pick the right spot instinctively. And I just loved marveling at the brain's ability to do that without even thinking about it. That was a really joyful experience, but I started paying for it in my 40s with knee problems. 3 things have helped me to keep backpacking now into my 60s: weightlifting for strength training, ultralight gear, and trekking poles. There's an old t-shirt that says, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have been nicer to my body. If you love backpacking as much as I do, get some poles and use them to save your joints. Another key reason for using trekking poles is for maintaining balance. 4 legs are better than 2, right? I can't tell you how many face plants trekking poles have saved me from, but I find that they also allow me to look around much more and enjoy the scenery without stopping because I don't have to keep my eyes so firmly fixed on the trail. Also, anytime the trail is sketchy in some way, whether it's rock strewn, slippery, or maybe there's lots of roots across the way, poles help navigate that while still maintaining a decent pace. And they provide enormous assistance when crossing streams, whether wading against a current or balancing on a downed log, or even better, navigating a rock hop without a foot sliding off a wet rock and getting a soaker. I'll also use the poles in that situation to test the steadiness of a rock in the stream before putting my full weight on it. Another benefit of trekking poles is to pitch your shelter. Virtually all of the lightest tent options make use of the poles you're already carrying for structure in the shelter, making them the ultimate multi-use gear item on the ultralight backpacker's gear list. Some people fear that this type of shelter somehow isn't robust enough for serious backcountry travel, but trekking pole supported shelters have carried me through the worst storms I've ever experienced, and have held firm where some freestanding tents would not have fared as well, especially in high winds from the side when those shock-corded poles sometimes can bow inwards. The last benefit I'll mention is that trekking poles help maintain a good pace on the trail, but I'm not going to explain that point just yet because it will make more sense to show you what I mean when we get to the section on technique. But for now, I'll just offer the teaser that changing the method for how you use poles, especially on the flat stretches, is key to accomplishing those big mile days. There are 2 modifications that you can make to the trekking poles and greatly improve their functionality, and I want to give proper credit here. Both of these ideas came from a blog article by Andrew Skirka, and I'll put that link in the description section below. The first is to remove the small basket that sits above the snow basket. Now, these little guys are so useless, nobody even knows what to call them. Sometimes they're called mud baskets, sometimes trekking baskets. The manufacturers fall all over themselves with silly claims that they prevent mud from getting kicked up on the back of our legs, or They perform the quote vital job of preventing the pole from sinking into soft ground. Any patch of mud deep enough to allow my pole to sink 3 inches is a patch of mud I'm going to walk around, not through. Maybe they would be helpful if you're in some really niche situation, like if you're hiking along soft sand along a beach or spongy turf in Scotland, but for most conditions they just are extra weight. Only about a half an ounce, I grant you, but that's at the end of a giant pendulum. And we've all heard the saying that a pound of weight on your feet is equal to 5 pounds on your back, or maybe it's 8 pounds. I think that saying has been repeated so many times, people are just making up their own numbers. But whatever that conversion rate actually is, even a half an ounce does really make a difference over many miles of swinging that pendulum. Most of the trails where I hike have brush along the edges, sometimes creeping well into the actual trail on the less frequented routes. And these little baskets also cause resistance as I'm dragging the pole forward through the brush. I removed the mud baskets from my poles more than 2 years ago and immediately noticed how much easier it was to swing the poles forward with each step. If you'd like to give this a try yourself, here's how to remove those baskets.
Just unscrew it. You have to pull a little bit of down pressure so that it accesses the threads. But eventually it gets past the threads and you just pull it right off.
But I definitely do save the snow baskets, and just so you can see that you can still use them just fine without that small basket that is usually seated up higher than the snow basket. There's still threads on the end of the trekking pole that hold the snow basket in place, as they certainly did today. The second suggestion is really controversial, and that is to remove the wrist straps. Now, the argument for wrist straps is that they reduce hand fatigue by distributing the weight to the forearms, decreasing the need to maintain a tight grip. I'll admit that, like most people, I was really resistant to this idea. In fact, I hiked for over a year with the straps hanging loosely but not removed, just to test the theory on the trail, and even then, I wasn't sure which way I preferred. Finally, I discovered that the straps on the black diamond poles could be removed and taken out and put back in fairly easily, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, and that convinced me to give it a try. 2 years and probably 600 trail miles later, I haven't regretted getting rid of the wrist straps, and this is why. I found out that without being locked into the straps, I shifted my grip on the poles easily for different conditions and frequently. I haven't actually timed it, but I believe I typically only hold the grip in one place for about 10 or 15 minutes. The fact that I can switch grips easily reduces hand fatigue in a different way and makes the poles more useful by quickly adapting to changing terrain. Let me show you what I mean. When descending a steep hill, I push my hand all the way to the end of the pole, maximizing the ability to lower my body slowly and reduce knee pain. When climbing, I choke up to the bottom of the grip and hold this wide spot in the circle of my index finger and thumb, which provides a nice flat surface to push off from. If the hill is really steep, I'll even grip down low with this extra piece. After all, that's what it's there for. On the flat stretches, I usually hold the grip with that bulge between the pinky and next finger, but I'll switch from time to time up to here, or hold the whole grip pistol style. The point being that not using the straps provides huge flexibility in the gripping method. Another reason not to use the straps is that it's just so nice to free up the hands quickly without having to fuss with getting in and out of the straps. So if I want to reach for the water bottle or grab the camera or just scratch my nose, it's just less hassle not to mess with the straps each time. Some people say that's one of the reasons why they like the straps, is because they can just let go and have the pole dangle while taking a picture or whatever. For me, that inevitably led to banging the poles on my kneecaps, exactly where I didn't want any extra bruising. So instead, I'll just tuck one pole under my arm, or stop and jab the tips into the ground, or just lean them against a tree. One time when I came up over a little rise hiking in the Bob Marshall Wilderness and encountered a grizzly bear, I was able in one smooth motion just to transfer the right pole to the left hand, reach for the bear spray with my right hand, and wave both poles in the air with the left hand while I was calling out, "Hey bear." If I had the wrist straps on that time, that motion likely would have gotten a lot less fluid, and it might even have gotten tangled with the strap due to the adrenaline in that situation and had trouble deploying the spray at all. It's also been pointed out that using wrist straps is a broken wrist waiting to happen. When we trip, the natural tendency is to open the hand and brace your fall. With no strap, that means you just drop the pole. But if you're tied into the pole with the strap, there's a chance that you fracture the wrist or forearm with the leverage of the pole, especially if it's jammed into a crack in the rock or a log. Now, I admit this to be a fairly rare occurrence, but it is something to add into the equation, as well as the more likely possibility that you're going to break the pole itself. Straps are hot and sweaty and uncomfortable and can cause blisters where they meet the heel of the hand, since you're rubbing that exact same place with every step. Okay, if you're sick of hearing me talk about wrist straps, skip to the techniques part. If not, and you want to know how to remove them without having to cut, then this is how you do that. Okay, so if you decided that you're ready to try taking the straps off, all you need to do is just take a tool like this. This is a scratch awl I like to use, but if you don't have one of those, you could just use a small nail and a hammer and locate the pin on the side of the handle right here. And I just like to hold that on the edge of the bench so that there's room for the pin to go down when I push on it. And you just apply a little pressure. It's that simple. And you can see the pin poking out the bottom now. And it is kind of roughed up, and I don't want to mess that up because that helps to keep the pin in place. So rather than just putting the pliers straight on there, I'm going to do an old plumber trick and use a bit of a rag on the jaws of the pliers, and then just pull with that, and that's it. That comes out. And then I like to take this out slowly so you can kind of pay attention to what it looks like. You see how the pin would go right in through there if it was inside the handle, so you know how to replace it if you decide that you want to, and maybe think about how that is folded so that you can replace that in the same way. We're going to talk about how to use hiking poles on uphill and downhill, but the biggest mistake I see people make with technique is when traveling across flat ground. There's a tendency to just carry the poles. I imagine the thinking is that it's a chance to take a break, but it's actually missing a great opportunity. If I'm being honest, I walk along flat ground a lot of the time with a gait that I call the Saunter, and that means planting the pole every other step. This is probably how most people use hiking poles most of the time. And, you know, that's okay when you're not in a hurry and feel like just cruising along, seeing the sights. The downside of the Saunter is that anytime you plant the pole ahead of your feet, there's a very slight push back that slows forward momentum. It's minimal, but it matters over many, many pole plantings. The best method is to use the poles the same way you would if cross-country skiing. That means to plant the tip of the pole about even or just behind the heel, offsetting right foot left pole and left foot right pole. I think of this as my Power Gait, and it takes a bit of practice, but what I've learned is that this method increases my speed by about a ½ mile per hour. Now I know that over and over in this video I keep mentioning trivial amounts and saying that they matter. But in this case, half a mile an hour over the course of a 10-hour day of hiking adds up to an extra 5 miles. That really is a lot. Truth to be told, this isn't sustainable for 10 hours unless you're in really great shape. And the terrain won't be flat for that long anyway. But I find that just making use of the Power Gait whenever the opportunity does arise really makes a difference and transforms a routine 15-mile day into a kick-ass 18-miler. And like anything, the more you do it, the more you're able to do it. Besides, it's just fun to feel like you're hitting the gas and hauling ass down the trail. When it comes to using the pole on the uphill, I pretty much do the opposite. This is my 4-wheel drive gait, and I deliberately cut my pace in half, so instead of normally there being about a foot of length between heel and toe, I shortened that to heel directly in front of the toe. Then I choke up on the poles and plant each one in front of the opposite foot. I fight the voice in my head that says that's just too slow, because in the long run, by pacing this way, I can chunk out the elevation gain without killing myself. And it actually seems to go faster. If it's an extended, steep section, I'm also not ashamed to stop and catch my breath every 20 or 30 steps as needed. No problem to take it slow and get her done. But of course, downhill is when the trekking poles really shine in the category of saving the body. If I know I'll be descending for a long stretch, I'll extend my poles from the usual 120 centimeters to 130 or 135, depending on how steep the terrain is. But the key here is to shift the grip to the tip of the handle so you're really pushing back on the pole and getting the maximum benefit of lowering yourself down the trail. I catch the lip of the front edge of the handle in between my fingers so it can hinge forward for the next step. This really pays off at the end of the day when you can still move and set up the shelter without grunting too much. With regard to pole length, the conventional wisdom says to make a 90-degree angle with the elbow, and that's a good place to begin, but feel free to play with that to find what feels good to you, and by all means experiment with changing the length to match the terrain. As far as pole recommendations, I've had really good luck with my Alpine carbon cork poles from Black Diamond, and I like them much better than my old Lecky poles, or is it Leaky? I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Although that's primarily because they're lighter and because I especially love this flip lock style of mechanism versus the twist lock. If you've used a pole supported ultralight shelter, the flip locks are much easier to adjust when you want to just add a little bit of length to the shelter. Cork handles are more comfortable for me than the soft rubber ones, and I also strongly advise against any handles with ridges in the back. It seems like a good idea at first glance to aid with grip when the hands are sweaty, but I find that it constantly abraded the soft skin that stretches between the thumb and index finger, causing hot spots and blisters in no time. The downside of the carbon cork is that they're expensive, but I recently learned that Black Diamond makes an aluminum version that's called the Trail Cork, and it's much more affordable and only really about an ounce heavier, so that's a great option. And I'll put a link in the description below to both of these. Okay guys, well, I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it was useful and helpful and worth the time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.